in the series on Indian sociological thought, I am today presenting on the first thinker, that is G.S. Ghurye. G.S. Ghurye is one of the founding fathers of Indian sociology and has contributed widely to the understanding of society in India. In this part of the lecture, I am going to talk about the perspective, and G.S. Ghurye is renowned for the Indological perspective, in the sense to understand that he was a Sanskrit scholar. He had a wide knowledge of the Sanskrit text, which helped him to read the Vedic texts, Shastras and epics, which helped him to provide an indigenous understanding, that is Indian understanding of the caste, tribe and other aspects of Indian society. But now let us look into his perspective or approach to the study of Indian society. As it is kind of understood that G.S. Ghurye is referred as theoretical pluralist, in the sense that theoretical pluralist, that he is not identified with any one single method or theory, because in the entire of his life period in his work, what is evident is that he is using multiple methods to study Indian society. So he will be using Indological, and he will be also kind of referring to text, but then at the same time he will be doing a lot of ethnographic study. He will use diffusion, evolutionary and also historical comparative method to arrive at the understanding, and that is the reason why he is referred as a theoretical pluralist. He relied on both empirical and textual method for studying Indian society. So it could be a kind of exaggeration to this kind of term him or call him as an armchair sociologist. He was doing empirical research at the same time relying on certain text which helped him to arrive at a comprehensive understanding of society in India. As it is evident that initially he was influenced by the diffusionist approach of anthropology, but later on he kind of shifted to Indological perspective, and his text has a kind of wide reference to Indological perspective. Now, when we actually try to understand the method that G.S. Ghurye used, it is very important to understand how the society of India has been studied, and in that context we see that there are two approaches to the study of Indian society. Number one, Indological, and number two is sociological approach. What do we mean when we say Indological approach? It is the kind of as we know, the term Indology means the study of Indian society, but kind of making reference to certain texts, certain existing literature which would kind of tell us about the society. So it claims that Indian society can be understood only through concepts, theories and framework of Indian civilization. And the sociological approach is kind of more in terms of empirical research, more in terms of ethnographic research. So if kind of to make it more easy to understand, M.N. Srinivas has used the distinction between the book view and the field view. So Indological view or Indological perspective relies on a book view. The scholar studies existing literature and arrives at a description or analysis of the institution, whereas sociology applies a field view. So what he means by field view is actually going to the field, collecting data and arriving at an analysis. So sociological approach is kind of considered to give us more holistic understanding, because it is not only based on particular text, but it is in terms of the life experiences of the people or the reality as it is experienced by the respondent, and therefore it is considered to be more empirical and considered more relevant as approach in sociology. Because when we look into the Indological approach, one of the problem with the Indological approach was that these scholars, even the Orientalist scholars, they were referring to text which were written by the Brahmins. They were kind of referring to Ramayana, Mahabharata, the epics, the Shastras, and it can be argued that these texts would provide a Brahminical point of view. So it kind of reflected a Brahminical hegemony to understand Indian society, and later on we see that there were a lot of critique to the Orientalist and Indologist, which came in from the subaltern perspective, that is the people who were looking into the Indian society from the perspective of the Dalit or from the perspective of the untouchable, and that is kind of a limitation of the Indological approach. But if we look into the kind of the evolution of the discipline in the initial classical theories, they were all kind of making reference to the Indological approach. But when we come to G.S. Ghurye, we see a balance of both. He was relying a lot on Indological approach, but then he has also kind of conducted number of empirical studies. So if we try to understand what is the Indological approach, as I already said, that it makes an attempt to understand Indian society through concepts, theories and frameworks that are closely associated with Indian civilization. It focuses on the unique feature of Indian society in structure, functions and dynamics that cannot be studied in comparison with the European society. So the whole idea that Orientalists were trying to understand Indian society with reference to the West, what was happening in the Western was considered as a model, and that was used to understand Indian society. But then the critique comes in which says that we cannot understand, we need to understand Indian society in its own cultural specificity. Indiology relies on book view and culture and less stress on doing empirical studies. They primarily adopted a historical and comparative approach. A historical because these texts were written in a particular period, that is in the past, and these texts are being used to understand the present society. So that is an historical method. And comparative, in the most of the time it was kind of compared with what was happening in the Western society. Their understanding of Indian society and its structure is largely based on the study of classical, Sanskritic and Persian text and literature. So these were all scholars in the initial classical period. We know that they were either renowned Sanskritic or they had knowledge of Persian literature, which they utilized in the understanding of India. The ideological construction of India can be found in the account of travelers like Megasthenes, of historians like Al-Biruni and later Abul Fazl and Alami. There are large number of Indological texts. Most of the initial theorization of the Indian society, whether it is in terms of the caste system or the family and village, comes in from the ideological construction. Now, after trying to understand what's an Indological perspective, let us try to understand how Ghurye's study utilizes or uses an Indological approach. As has been repeatedly said, that Ghurye had a profound knowledge of Sanskrit, and he referred to Vedas, Shastra, epic, poetry of Kalidas and Babhuti in his study of Indian society. He made use of literature of modern writers like Bankim Chandra Chatterjee as well. He used Indological data to glorify India's cultural past and manifest concern through his writing about caste consolidation, tribal unrest and religious conflicts in India. So, is what his contribution becomes very significant. At one level, he is referring to these religious texts and documents which kind of gives us a picture of a glorified past, but then he is utilizing that understanding to understand the contemporary problem, the problem of how caste was being visualized as kind of creating conflict, and or how because of certain ways in which the tribal problem had been conceived, it was leading to unrest. So that is the significant, that he is not just kind of giving us a description of the Indian society, he is giving an analytical understanding of the contemporary problems which was a part of Indian society. So when we look into the Indological approach of Ghurye, we see that it is a combination of several factors. Number one, which has already been said, that he was a scholar of Sanskrit since his school days, and he utilizes this knowledge to read Vedic text and others. And he also studied caste system as an evolution from the Aryan system. the understanding of an evolutionary perspective in terms of the distinction between caste and race comes in from his Indological perspective. There was a strong influence of W.H. River to also applies the diffusionist approach to the study of Indian society. And as already said, he was using the data or existing literature in order to glorify Indian society, and this was being done also in the context in which a number of Orientalist discourses were bring about a negative a perception of Indian system, in the sense that caste system was considered as discriminatory and exploitative, or the fact that there was a lot of conflict in the family and it was breaking from joint family to nuclear family and so on. So therefore, there was a requirement to give in an alternate perspective, that India was not always the way it is in the contemporary society. At one point of time, it was a more egalitarian and a less conflict based society, and there were certain factors, certain reasons that led to the society becoming more disintegrated and fragmented. He also uses a knowledge of the past, readings of Shastra, epic and religious texts to understand the contemporary problem, and he had a nationalist mind, that is, he wanted to have a strong idea of one's own society, create a more positive picture of one's own society rather than critiquing it and always looking at it from a negative perspective. Now, when we look into his application of Indological approach to the study of Indian society, we see that for Ghurye, Indian society through its long historical process of growth presents a picture of vast mosaic of culture held together by religion, value, norms of Hinduism. This is where he is giving us a a positive picture, that there has been a lot of diversity. If we traverse through the history of India, and there has been a number of culture coexisting, and there is a united India, or there is a unity, and what contributes to the unity amongst diversity is the role of Hinduism as a tolerant religion. According to Ghurye, it has maintained the continuity, that is, Indian society has maintained the continuity of values with limited variation in the course of time and space. The present can only be understood with reference to the past. Therefore, religious text can be taken as authentic blueprint for the study of Indian society. So, he gives us a valid reason why there was so much of reliance on the study of literature, on the existing text, Brahminical text, and that is that it will give us to understand what was happening or what was the nature of society in the past can only be understood when we go and refer to these religious texts. And these understanding of what was in the past will help us to understand the nature of the society in the present. In one of his most celebrated work, Caste Race in India, Ghurye has examined the emergence of caste through the ages, capturing every detail possible to give a picture of Hindu caste society as it was functioning before modern ideas affected its course. So, here we also see an evolutionary perspective that he utilizes to look into the emergence of caste system from the Aryan system to the present context, and also the role of the Western influence, which brought about the change in the functioning or the understanding of caste in India. Drawn from the Indological sources such as Vedic Samhitas and the Brahmanas, Dharmasastra and Mahabharata. So, this understanding of the nature of Indian society was based on the reading of number of texts. G.S. Ghurye's approach is distinctive, like from the other Indological approach, he is quite a little different. It's not the bringing in the same Indological perspective, and this is for two reasons. Number one, because he himself was a Sanskritic scholar, and therefore he is using his knowledge to understand and explain Indian society. Many of the Indological theorists or scholars who were using Indological approach were Western scholars who did not have a knowledge of Sanskrit, and therefore their understanding of India was based on interpretation by someone else, and that is kind of not in G.S. Ghurye. He himself kind of read these texts and arrive at his own understanding of the way in which the text helps us to understand Indian society. Number two, he was a student of Professor River. He uses the method of diffusion. So, he is not only using Indological approach, along with that he is using his evolutionary historical diffusionism to understand caste and cultural synthesis of Indian society. So, when we look into a kind of evaluation of G.S. Ghurye, there are a lot of critique which kind of says that he was looking into the Hindu society only per se. Ghurye was not focusing on the element of conflict, on the element of the negative side. So, he was kind of weaving a very positive picture of Indian society. So, he was trained in the craft of Indology. Ghurye was not averse to fieldwork tradition of social and cultural anthropology, and this is also because of his training in Cambridge, where he was with W.H.R. River, a renowned anthropologist. He acquired the idea of anthropology and fieldwork, and the evidence of his being involved in empirical field research is his two work. One was his field survey of sex habits of middle class people in Bombay, which he conducted in the 1930s, and this was published in 1938. And the second empirical work, ethnographic work carried out by G.S. Ghurye was the monograph of the Mahadev Kohlis, which was published in 1963. Now, when we look into both the works, it kind of demonstrate his idea, it demonstrates the idea that he was involved in empirical research and he was not kind of restricted to armchair sociology. Now, when we look into Indology and we kind of say that he is a theoretical pluralist, we also need to look into his uses of diffusionism. And kind of when we look into his work, we see there are three intellectual trends that contributed to the formation of his sociological work. So, number one is British Orientalism, number two is nationalism and diffusionism. This has been quoted by Carol Upadhyaya in her work on G.S. Ghurye. Diffusionism enjoyed a brief but an intense period of popularity in England during the period 1910 and 1913. It emerged as a critique of late 19th century evolutionism, which was based on the theory of psychic unit of mankind. Evolutionism held that every society will eventually advance towards civilization, passing through definite stages, which mean that every human group is capable of independent invention of higher civilization. If we look into the evolutionism or evolutionary theory, we see it is kind of very evident in most of the Orientalist discourse on India, and they were all kind of looking into the evolution of Indian society from a caste-based society to a class-based society, from joint family to nuclear family, from simple agricultural society to complex industrial urban society. So, this was evolutionarism, that as society, as with passage of time and space, society is evolving, it is kind of becoming more complex, it is getting more developed. The basic diffusionist idea was that superior people or races would dominate inferior ones, thereby transmitting civilization, clearly resonates with the Aryan invasion theory of Indian society. Apparently, the idea that did not originate within 20th century diffusionism. G.S. Ghurye was greatly influenced by W.H.R. River during his stay at Cambridge and was deeply affected by his death in 1922, which he regarded as the biggest tragedy of his life. Due to his connection with River, diffusionism was usually identified as Ghurye's major theoretical orientation, and when we read the review of G.S. Ghurye, Many have argued that it was very difficult for G.S. Ghurye to give up his diffusionism because he was kind of very influenced by River, and in most of his work the diffusionism is reflected, or it is evident. There are two articles of Ghurye that bear evidence of this phenomena of cultural diffusionism: the disposal of human placenta and megalithic remains of India. In both these articles, when we see, he kind of will give the idea of the dominance of one culture over the other, which kind of takes forward the civilization. Ghurye's approach to sociology of India was already evident in Caste and Race, where he traced the origin of the caste system to the Indo-Aryan civilization of the Gangetic Plain, using historical, archaeological and anthropometric sources. So this is the theoretical pluralism of G.S. Ghurye. He is not restricting his study to one particular theory or approach. He is combining, as and when the need required, as and when the study was demanded, multiple methods, multiple perspectives to arrive at the study of Indian society. Ghurye argued that Indian civilization was formed through the slow assimilation of non-Aryan groups to Hinduism, and that the caste system spread through the same process of cultural diffusion. So diffusionism is used to understand the system of caste system in Indian society, and also to kind of give us an understanding of a socio-cultural religious structures of Indian society. Apart from these two articles, Ghurye has also wrote an article on the aspect of Indian funerary practices to substantiate his point of cultural diffusionism. He has written extensively on the funeral rites or the death rite, which is also based on how ideas kind of diffuse from one group to the other. Ghurye also used historical and comparative method in his study, which have been followed by his students. So when we look into also M.N. Srinivas's work, when we look into other sociologists who kind of worked under his supervision, they kind of carry on with the legacy of Ghurye and uses the historical comparative method in the study of Indian society. So when we kind of come to a kind of an understanding in terms of looking into the approach that G.S. Ghurye had used in the understanding of Indian society, we can see a combination of a number of approaches. To begin with, we see that he has understood Indian society is kind of understood in terms of its unique culture, and the unique culture brings in also very close to the idea of cultural specificity, and this kind of differentiate Ghurye's contribution to sociology and anthropology from the time when people were kind of arriving at generalization. So he, as an Indian sociologist, kind of tells us that we need an indigenous method to understand society, because the system of caste, the system of tribe, the variety of diversity of religion in Indian society, these are unique experiences of India. These are kind of cannot be understood in kind of going through the Western model, because if we look into the Orientalist and they or the Western scholars, they were making reference to the industrial revolution or industrialization, which brought about a change from the peasant society to urban industrial society, and they applied that model into the Indian society and kind of argued that in India the village system, which was kind of the dominant part, agriculture, which was the dominant part, because of influence of urbanization and industrialization, has undergone change and has kind of become more urban, more industrial. But then later on, when by a kind of taking on the legacy of G.S. Ghurye, we'll see how M.N. Srinivas in the study of the village will kind of argue that these understanding of the evolution of society in India was kind of exaggerated or based on Western assumption. So this is one of the first approach, that to look into Indian society specifically from an indigenous lens, that is to look into the culture, cities, civilization, the growth, transformation as a unique experience of Indian society. Then, as has been already discussed, he is giving us a descriptive ethnography. He is not just kind of arriving at kind of applying the Indological literature and giving us a kind of the description as it was there. He is analyzing it in terms of the empirical reality and then providing us an ethnographic picture of the Indian culture and civilization. The third approach, which is very significant to G.S. Ghurye, is the nationalistic tradition, and this is kind of very evident when we read the large number of his texts, which talks about India as a nation, talks about the scheduled tribe, or talks about the secular problem in Indian society. And then when the fourth is in terms of a detailed description of social phenomena. So whether he is looking into the relation between man and women, family or cities, caste system, he is giving us a complete holistic understanding of these institutions. And the foremost, which is obviously the historical diffusionism, which has been explained and understood throughout the discussions. So we see that when I started off by kind of using the term theoretical pluralism, we arrive at a conclusion that G.S. Ghurye was a giant in its own self and has contributed immensely to both to the scholarship of sociology in India as well as the professionalization of sociology of India. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.